book series, The Chronicles of Vladimir Tod. The Chronicles of Vladimir Tod. Book number 2. Book number 2. Book 2. Let's give you guys some book sounds. crossing the snow toward another cabin, Vicus explained. This place that I am taking you, it is a room without windows, without light, and so well insulated that it also without external noise. You may panic at first, but hold your will. The idea is to remove any external influences so that you may tap into your deepest telepathic powers. Vlad swallowed the lump in his throat, which hadn't been there a moment before. Will you go in with me? Vicus cast him a reassuring glance. Yes, of course. A small cabin was ahead of them. True to Vicus's words, it had no windows and only one door. With a deep breath for bravery, Vlad followed Vicus up the steps and inside. The light from outside drew a long line along the floor. Vlad could see 2 stools in the middle of the room. That was all there was. When Vicus closed the door, Vlad felt as if he might never see that light again. He took several calming breaths before looking around. It was useless. The room was pitch black. The only sound was Vlad's breathing and Vicus's slow, steady heartbeat. Now, Malachi Diavo, I want you to focus on your heart, on the blood pumping through your veins, on the air as it enters and exits your lungs. Feel the life within you, the energy is pouring out of you. Vlad did as he was instructed. At first, he closed his eyes, but once he realized what a ridiculous and futile action that was, he opened them wide to the dark room. His heartbeat had slowed some, not as calm as Vicus's, but calmer than it had been. His blood rushed through his veins, and his breaths were deep and even. Vicus's voice was soft and coaxing. Good. Very good. Now push gently with your mind into mine. What am I thinking at this moment? You're thinking... Vlad choked back tears. You're thinking about how much I look like my dad. Very good, Vladimir. Now, I want you to focus on Otis. Where is he? What is he doing? Thinking. How does he feel? Push hard if you have to, and don't be disappointed if you can't reach him. Distance is something that many vampires struggle with. Vlad took a deep breath and pictured Otis's face in his mind. He thought of blood and how empty his stomach was, how delicious a nice warm blood bag would be right now. Then he pushed with his mind. Otis removed his gloves with shaking fingers. He hadn't realized how difficult it would be to see Vlad go through the funeral festivities. The entire time, he could feel pain emanating from his nephew, but could do nothing to stop it. Vicus was teaching the boy already, and Vlad's drain but couldn't recall having brought up Henry at all the night before. Why? Reach him with your mind. Vicus's voice was calm again, but it felt to Vlad as if Vicus was trying hard to keep it so. That's halfway around the world. I don't think I can. Try. The chamber removes the difficulties you encounter in your normal routine. In here, you may reach people who you had little or no success at reaching outside. Vlad sighed and relaxed his muscles. He focused on Henry and pushed. Henry looked over at Joss. He had no idea what his cousin was doing, but it certainly wasn't winning. He pushed the turbo button, slashed Joss's android to pieces, and raised his arms triumphantly above his head. There was no doubt about it. Joss was even worse at video games than Vlad. But at least Vlad was a challenge at times. Vlad pulled out of Henry's mind with a smirk and made a mental note to play against Joss more. If nothing else, it might be good for his self-esteem. Excellent. You are indeed skilled. Malachi Diavo. Vicus took a deep breath. Now we move on to mind control. I want you to push into Otis's mind again. But this time, I want you to insert an action into his thought process. Take over control gently, so that he is completely unaware, and make him scratch his forehead. Vlad shifted his feet, but he didn't push into Otis's mind. It felt weird, the idea of controlling Otis. Henry was one thing, but this was his uncle. Is something wrong? No, Vlad cleared his throat and tried impossibly to look at Vicus in the darkness. If you don't mind, I'd rather focus on Vladimir. This is an important part of your lessons. You must learn to control the minds of others. Your drudge will be much easier to control. After that, those whom you care little or nothing for. The most difficult to control are those closest to you, whom you feel great affection for. This is a mental block that most vampires cannot break, but you have the potential to become as great a vampire as I have ever seen. More powerful than your father. Indeed, perhaps even more powerful than myself. But you must. None of that matters to me. Vlad's voice shook slightly. He really didn't want to disappoint Vicus, but this was something he wasn't willing to budge on. If controlling Henry made him feel even slightly guilty, controlling his uncle would make him feel entirely sick. Vicus lowered his voice so that Vlad had to strain in order to hear him. But it should. So few vampires have your potential. I had thought your mother's blood would dilute your abilities, but I was wrong. You could be a great vampire, Vladimir, but you must trust me. Vlad closed his eyes and opened them again. He had adjusted to the darkness, but had grown tired of seeing it. I'm sorry, Vicus. I just can't do what you want me to. Enough. If I must be stern with you, I will. See Otis in your mind. He's sitting at the table alone, his forehead resting in his left hand. Stop it, I won't. Just a nudge, just a small movement, a scratch. No, Vlad pushed hard into Vicus's mind. Vicus stumbled back, knocking his stool to the floor. The boy was strong, of that there was no doubt, but he was tired, far from home, and clearly didn't want to learn how to control the actions of others, least of all his uncle. It was time to break for the day. Vlad pulled out of Vicus's thoughts. It is time to break for the day, Vladimir. Vlad hadn't wanted to control him, but he had little choice. Vicus opened the door and the light poured in, welcoming them outside. They just moved down the steps when Vicus paused. That was uncalled for, Malachi Diavo. There is no need to control my mind. Vlad shook his head. He should have felt guilty but didn't. But you wouldn't listen to reason. spoke often of Thomas, and occasionally one of the other vampires would join them to exchange a tale of Thomas's heroics or something humorous that had once happened to them while in Thomas's presence. At the end of yet another tale, Otis chuckled. I told Thomas not to frighten Vicus like that, but in the end I was rather hoping he would. Vicus laughed loudly. You were terrible guests this summer, and lucky that I hold no grudges. At one point, Vlad noticed that it seemed all of the vampires of Siberia were awake and moving about. He was about to whisper to Otis to ask why they stayed awake during this day when he realized that the answer was obvious. It was their day to honor Thomas, and as Thomas no longer slept, so they would remain awake until the feast had ended. By the time the sun disappeared below the horizon, Vlad had almost forgotten his immense and demanding hunger. Almost. The door opened, and every person in the room, Pepper, Otis, Vicus, Tristan, and Vlad, filed outside in a rush. At Vlad's raised eyebrow, Vicus smiled. So the feast begins. Vlad furrowed his brow in confusion. But there's plenty of blood wine here. Where are they going? Otis and Vicus exchanged glances before Otis regarded Vlad with a somber gaze. He spoke in a gentle tone. They go to feast from the source, Vladimir. Vicus and I will feast here with you as a courtesy. As a courtesy. Vlad's stomach twisted. People. They were going to feed on people. The idea should have nauseated him, but it did. He threw a glance across the room at Tristan, who was gathering goblets at a pitcher of blood wine, and a pitcher of blood wine. What about Tristan? Will he feed on people tonight? its essence with his intended creation. This is sometimes done with a blood exchange, but can be carried on in many ways. However, as with setting glyphs, something you'll learn more about later, the vampire's intent is key. Vlad nodded. Intent made a lot of sense. Vlad was awakened by the sound of someone slamming their fist down on a table. He sat up in bed and listened. Through the door drifted Otis's voice, shaking with anger. He is not what gossip deems him to be. Vicus's voice, calm but certain, followed. And what if he is? What if Vladimir Tod is the Brabus? A long, silent moment went by. Finally, Otis spoke again, but this time his voice was broken by tears. I am at a loss for words. Then allow me to speak. How did Vladimir obtain the Lucius? This is an enormous amount of power for a young boy to wield. Otis exhaled a long sigh. Thomas stole it from the Stokerton Council. I imagine he wanted to protect Vlad from their vengeance. Much good it has done. Vladimir is safe, so perhaps Thomas's thievery was wise after all. It sounded like Vicus refilled his goblet, and after several swallows, he continued. It frightens you that he carries the Lucius with him. Of course, but it frightens me more what might happen should he lose it. Otis's tone changed then, as if his utterance had surprised even him. As you said, it's an enormous amount of power for a young boy. Vicus's words quieted some. Who could imagine Dom Augustine Calmet, kindest soul to ever enter Elysia, lover of humankind, builder of a bridge between our worlds, would be the creator of such a monstrous weapon? Blackadier's uncle pacing, as if growing increasingly impatient with their conversation. He thought it was time for vampires to pass on from this world, that humans were fit to be the dominant species on Earth. A small laugh from Vicus, the fool. At least he knew where his loyalties lay. You question my loyalty. I only question your reasons for not assisting me. A pause from Otis. Come to Bathory. Watch over Vladimir in my absence. You can keep him safe. The Stokerton Council wouldn't dare. Let the boy stay here, then. I can't. His guardian would be heartbroken. Just as I would be heartbroken to abandon my post to act as nursemaid for a child who hardly needs one. It sounded like Vicus was pouring more blood wine. He sighed and said, You are troubled, Otis, and with good reason. Running from Elysia has proven quite taxing on your soul. It has affected your reasoning. Then, just as suddenly as the pacing had begun, it stopped. Don't do this for me, then. Do it for Thomas, for our brother, our friend. Do it so that his memory will not perish along with his son. Protect him, Vicus. Protect Vlad. Vicus spoke slowly, as if he wanted to be sure Otis understood his every word. You ask too much, my friend. Another moment of silence, followed by hurried footsteps and the slamming of a door, so loud that Vlad's heart jumped into his throat. Vlad shivered, slipped out of bed, and closed the door behind him. The fire was still crackling in the immense fireplace, filling the main room with a warm glow. Vlad moved toward it, rubbing his hands over the goosebumps on his arms. Vicus was seated in the chair facing the fire, watching the flames with intense focus. Vlad took the chair across from him. They were the only two in the room, something that both intrigued and comforted Vlad. Heavy drapes covered the windows, but Vlad could see moonlight peeking into the room where the curtains met. Vicus filled up a pitcher of blood wine. Vlad nodded and grabbed a goblet from the nearby table. Vicus filled it to the brim, and they settled back in their chairs with their drinks. Does it bother you to be called Little Devil? I apologize. No, it's not that. Vlad looked into his goblet. You called me the Provis. What does that mean? Vicus's eyes were careful. He looked over Vlad's shoulder to the door. Otis had slammed on his way out and then back at Vlad. The story of the Provis is an ancient one. Your uncle has not shared this tale with you. Vlad shook his head and took another drink. The spice blood sent delicious warmth through his body. Vicus drained his glass and refilled it. He glanced over Vlad's shoulder again before looking at Vlad with something that resembled determination in his eyes. Long ago, when my grandfather was young. Now mind you, Malachi Deavo, that my grandfather, that is to say the man who made my creator, my father into a vampire, is now well over 2,000 years old. But back then, when the wounds of his creation had barely had time to heal, an ancient prophecy was unearthed. It was probably the most important prophecy ever discovered for vampire kind. It told of a vampire of unique origin, one who was born, not made. Something wet dripped onto Vlad's jeans. He looked down and cursed under his breath at the blood wine he'd spilled. He hadn't even noticed he'd been leaning forward on the edge of his seat. He sat the glass down and relaxed back in his chair. Vicus handed him a handkerchief and continued as Vlad dabbed at the stain. The prophecy stated that a great and powerful vampire would one day come into our midst, one that laws would be broken to create, one who would be born of a human mother. He would have no sensitivity to sunlight. He would be able to manipulate the minds of most living creatures, and it said that he could not be killed by any means known to vampire or humankind. Injured, yes, but not killed. This man is the Provis. Vicus drained his glass and sat it beside Vlad's. It is the belief of many in Elysia that the Provis has come, and I know of only one vampire who has been born, Vladimir. Vlad's eyes grew wide. His heart thumped hard against his insides, then settled into a quiet, steady beat. Me. Not everyone believes that you are. In fact, a much larger group believes that you are not, and that the so-called prophecy is but a fairy tale. But there's more. Vicus stood and stepped closer to the fire. He placed one elbow on the mantel and propped his chin on his open hand, then tilted his head some so that he was looking at Vlad once again. It is what I am about to share with you that steals peaceful sleep away from many of our brethren, Malachi Deavo, no matter what they believe about you. Vicus turned to face Vlad. His shadow flickered against the wall to his right. His voice was gruff, as if the subject could easily bring even a man of his power to tears. He held Vlad's gaze. It is prophesied that the Provis will come to rule over all of vampire kind, and that he will enslave the entire human race. Vlad's jaw dropped. Vicus nodded, as if to tell him that, yes, it was true, even though Vlad hadn't offered otherwise. The tattoo on the inside of Vlad's left wrist glowed brightly. He shook his head again, hardly able to comprehend what he was hearing. I'm not the Provis. Even if the prophecy is right, and there will be some guy born someday like that, it's not me. I'm not him. Are you so sure? Vlad dropped his eyes. Vicus moved toward a separate door, clearly ready to retire for the evening. Be careful, Vladimir, and listen to your uncle. He means well. The door closed behind Vicus, and Vlad returned to his chair and turned back to the fire. The Provis. So that's what the Encyclopedia Vampirica had been hiding from him in those paragraphs he couldn't seem to translate. A story about a vampire who would be born and was destined to reign over all of vampire kind, whether they liked it or not. His stomach twisted and turned. What if someone really did try to kill him just to see if he'd die? It was bad enough knowing some psycho slayer was hunting him, and that Eddie Poe was determined to weasel his opinion into the light of day. But now this. Vlad took a deep breath and let it out slowly, fighting to remain calm. After a short time and many more calming breaths, his eyes fluttered, closed. Otis awoke him with a gentle shake. Vlad rubbed his eyes, sure that he could sleep for several more hours. Otis smiled. His skin looked pink and healthy. Go to bed, Vlad. That chair can't be comfortable. Vlad nodded. He started to ask Otis if he thought Vlad was the vampire the prophecy spoke of, but then closed his mouth again and shuffled off to his room. If Otis did think he was the prophet, Vlad didn't want to know. Alrighty, guys. I'm going to stop there for tonight. I hope you guys enjoyed the video and are enjoying the book so far. I hope you guys are able to relax, 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 relax. Maybe even tingle, 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 tingle a little bit. I just want to say thank you again for getting my channel to 300 subscribers. 300 lovely skeletons. I appreciate every single one of you. Thank you so much, my skeletons, my skeletons, my skeletons, my skeletons. If this video piqued your interest at all, feel free to leave a like and a comment. I hope you guys have a good night. Have a good night. Sleep tight. Sleep tight. And as that saying